The death of independent thought, a wake-up call. Picture this. You open your eyes tomorrow morning and suddenly you realize that the people surrounding you have stopped asking why. The world moves at breakneck speed, drowning us in an endless tsunami of data, while our minds, once sharp instruments for analysis and understanding, have transformed into passive receivers. Consider the implications. When a civilization loses its capacity for analytical reasoning, when the power to question, examine, and contemplate gets replaced by knee-jerk responses and shallow viewpoints echoed endlessly online, what becomes of us? Today, we're exploring a troubling reality: the erosion of analytical reasoning and the emergence of what modern thinkers describe as mass intellectual decline, a condition where large populations embrace superficial thought patterns, accept stories without scrutiny, and abandon their mental autonomy without awareness. By this video's conclusion, you'll encounter a vital revelation that could determine whether we rescue our intellectual freedom or surrender it completely to forces designed to keep us docile. Before we continue, I'd appreciate if you'd subscribe, hit that like button, and drop your perspective in the comments below. What you're about to hear might reshape how you perceive reality itself. For those who still value authentic truth-seeking, please share this message. Now, let's confront an unsettling reality. Genuine thought requires effort, and our modern landscape actively discourages it. Today's environment doesn't celebrate deep reflection. It celebrates rapid responses, emotional impulses, and following the herd. This pattern isn't accidental. Everything from recommendation algorithms feeding you confirmation to education models, emphasizing rote learning over exploration, actively trains us away from analytical reasoning. Noam Chomsky identified this decades earlier, describing how institutions create what he termed manufactured consent. When populations learn to consume without scrutiny and agree without comprehension, they become manageable and deceivable. Analytical reasoning, once considered essential to human development, now appears problematic. It interrupts viral outrage cycles. It slows digital arguments. It questions dominant narratives. It dares to ask, is this actually accurate? In our era obsessed with being correct, merely posing that question feels threatening. How did we arrive at this point? The roots run surprisingly deep. Information saturation plays a massive role in our daily experience. Research by Daniel Kahneman reveals that modern individuals process quintuple the daily information compared to previous generations. Notifications, texts, breaking alerts, perspectives, advertisements, and updates assault us constantly. Human neurology wasn't designed for this barrage. When overwhelmed, our brains take shortcuts. They lean on automatic patterns, mental biases, and herd mentality to manage complexity. Instead of evaluating concepts analytically, we scan for social cues, particularly from peers, online personalities, or authority figures. Psychologists call this social proof. While it's an innate survival adaptation, it's dangerously exploitable. Recall seeing viral content with massive engagement and assuming it must be legitimate or significant? That's not logic operating, it's a psychological bypass. This explains why intellectual laziness spreads rapidly. Not because humans lack intelligence, but because we're trained to follow signals rather than reason. Another alarming development involves declining reading habits, particularly immersive reading. Marianne Wolf's neuroscience research shows digital media is literally rewiring our neural pathways. We skim more, tab jump constantly, and struggle maintaining focus on extended texts. Here's the problem. Analytical thought demands sustained concentration. You cannot analyze, reflect, or genuinely comprehend when your attention constantly fragments. Reflect honestly. When did you last complete an entire article without phone checking? When did you last pause after hearing something provocative to contemplate rather than immediately respond? These once common practices are vanishing. Carl Sagan, among the 20th century's greatest intellects, warned us, "We've created a civilization utterly dependent on science and technology where virtually nobody understands science or technology." His concern transcended mere ignorance. He feared losing our capacity for analytical thought about the systems governing our lives. In our opinion-saturated world, The ultimate rebellion is simply thinking with clarity. But this crisis extends beyond technology or education. It's deeply emotional. Analytical reasoning feels uncomfortable. It demands admitting our knowledge has limits. It bruises our egos. It creates cognitive dissonance when cherished beliefs clash with new evidence. In a culture worshiping certainty, confidence, and identity above everything else, this proves deeply unsettling. So instead of thinking, we become defensive. We retreat into ideological camps. We repeat catchphrases. We ostracize dissenters. We evade complexity. We memorize talking points rather than engaging in Socratic dialogue, the authentic, honest exchange that has fueled philosophical progress for millennia. What we're witnessing transcends declining thought. It's a cultural shift toward mental complacency. The consequences prove catastrophic. When populations abandon analytical thinking, they stop questioning. When questioning disappears, vulnerability follows. To manipulation, to propaganda, to fear-based control, the essential question becomes, who profits when societies stop thinking independently? Stay tuned, because what follows reveals how deeply these mechanisms permeate our existence and why reclaiming our intellectual capacity isn't merely personal, it's morally imperative. The systems that keep us docile. Understanding this collective decline requires looking beneath surface explanations to examine how certain institutions evolve on, not to encourage independent thought, but to suppress it. Consider our education system first. John Taylor Gatto, an acclaimed educator and fierce critic of conventional schooling, argued that modern education doesn't exist to create independent thinkers. He stated plainly, schools primarily teach obedience, not enlightenment. Gatto maintained that mandatory schooling emerged during industrialization to prepare compliant factory workers, predictable, obedient, and non-disruptive. Consider that deeply. Rather than learning how to think, we learn what to think. From childhood, students get evaluated not on thought, originality, or depth, but on their ability to memorize and reproduce information. Conformity earns rewards. Curiosity often gets treated as disruption. Gradually, the lesson crystallizes. Follow instructions, stay within boundaries, and minimize questions. This conditioning doesn't end with graduation. It intensifies throughout adulthood. In professional environments, media consumption, even personal relationships, we discover that speaking up, challenging consensus, or maintaining unpopular positions carries costs. Fear of social rejection, of being labeled problematic or contrarian, often sufficiently silences our deepest concerns. So we remain quiet, but prolonged silence transforms into complicity. Erich Fromm observed this in Escape from Freedom, explaining how many secretly desire surrendering their intellectual freedom because genuine freedom brings responsibility. Responsibility can feel overwhelming. Independent thinking means you cannot blame others for your ignorance. You forfeit the comfort of crowds. You must confront truth's uncertainty, which proves too heavy a burden for many. So we choose comfort instead. We choose distraction. We choose simplicity over nuance. In doing so, we become easier to manipulate. Social media has amplified this exponentially. What began as platforms for global connection transformed into battlegrounds for opinion warfare, outrage cycles, and algorithmic control. Every platform optimizes for scrolling, reacting, and consuming, not thinking. You're constantly nudged toward belief-confirming content. You're encouraged to respond instantly, emotionally, often angrily. Platforms reward engagement, not accuracy. They profit from division, not comprehension. Amid this chaos, reasoned voices get drowned out. Thoughtfulness appears slow, ineffective, even irrelevant. Why reflect when reacting gets more likes faster? Marshall McLuhan predicted this in the 1960s, warning that the medium is the message. How we receive information fundamentally alters our thinking. Today's media encourages speed over depth, outrage over nuance, and certainty over intellectual humility. Even truth itself gets distorted. In our misinformation age, what's accurate matters less than what's viral. People no longer assess ideas through evidence or logic. They judge by consensus, the most dangerous form of majority tyranny, not political, but cognitive. Where do we proceed from here? We start asking superior questions, questions challenging assumptions, demanding genuine answers beyond slogans or context-free statistics. What narrative are you being sold? Who profits from your belief? What assumptions underpin your certainty? How often do you genuinely explore opposing perspectives, not to attack them, but to understand them? These questions prove difficult but essential because countering collective intellectual decline requires more than intelligence. It demands courage. Courage to be mistaken. Courage to learn. Courage to admit ignorance and pursue knowledge anyway. Socrates, among history's first champions of analytical thought, famously declared, "True wisdom lies in recognizing how little you know." This wasn't self-deprecation, it was an invitation toward curiosity, continuous questioning, and intellectual humility facing a vast, mysterious universe. Yet today, humility proves scarce. Certainty gets worshipped. Arrogance masquerades as wisdom. Everyone possesses opinions. Few possess understanding. Everyone wants to speak. Few want to listen. Ironically, genuine thinkers often stay quiet, observant, and reserved. They recognize that wisdom emerges not from noise, but from silence, from contemplation and deep engagement with complexity. This precisely explains why analytical thinkers get outnumbered and dismissed. In cultures rewarding speed and spectacle, the gradual process of thinking stands little chance. But we cannot abandon it because surrendering your capacity for independent thought means surrendering freedom. You become a puppet manipulated by invisible forces. Let's be explicit. These forces aren't abstract concepts. They're economic, political, and cultural realities. They're corporations profiting from your addiction to mindless content, politicians relying on your emotional reactions, institutions depending on your unquestioning compliance. But reclaiming your mind changes everything. You become manipulation resistant. You begin seeing through illusions. You stop being a passive idea consumer and become an active truth seeker. In that act, however modest, you ignite something powerful, a flame that has burned throughout history in philosophers, scientists, revolutionaries, and truth-tellers who refuse to stop thinking. So the question becomes, will you join them? Continue watching because next we're diving deeper into the psychology behind collective thinking. You'll discover why even brilliant people fall into these traps and how our brains get tricked into believing what we want to be true rather than what is true. We're far from finished. The most critical revelation awaits: the mind's hidden vulnerabilities. To genuinely grasp rising intellectual complacency, we must explore the internal battlefield, the mind itself. Despite our faith in logic, human brains operate far more emotionally than rationally. We believe we make fact-based decisions, but reality proves far more complex. Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking work, Thinking, Fast and Slow, demonstrates our brains operate through two systems. One fast and instinctive, the other slow and deliberate. The fast system operates quickly, automatically, emotionally. It leaps to conclusions, makes instant judgments, and conserves energy. The slow system proves thoughtful, analytical, and cautious, but demands effort. Here's the issue. In our perpetually accelerated world, most people remain stuck in fast mode. No time or willingness exists to decelerate and think deeply, so we depend on heuristics, stereotypes, and mental shortcuts that feel correct but frequently aren't. This creates ideal conditions for mass manipulation. Politicians, marketers, and media organizations understand how to exploit our mental shortcuts. They package complex realities into simple binaries. They deploy emotionally charged language bypassing reason. They prime us through repeated narratives until we accept them as truth, not through verification, but through familiarity. The danger, once we accept something as true, our brains defend that belief regardless of evidence. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, among the most powerful cognitive traps existing. Examine your own beliefs momentarily. How frequently do you seek contradicting evidence? How often do you genuinely listen to opposing arguments rather than preparing counterarguments? Honestly, probably less than you think. And that's not defective, it's human nature. But it becomes problematic when we lack awareness. Another crucial concept, groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where harmony seeking within groups produces irrational or dysfunctional decisions. It's been documented in everything from corporate failures to historical atrocities. People silence doubts for unity's sake. They prioritize consensus over truth. Irving Janis, who coined the term, discoverer and even highly intelligent, well-meaning people make catastrophic decisions when suppressing dissent and avoiding critical evaluation. Why? Because challenging groups feels unsafe. Because defying norms requires more than intelligence, it requires integrity and courage. Yet history demonstrates progress has always emerged from those daring to think differently. Galileo, Darwin, Nietzsche, Martin Luther King all faced rejection, ridicule, or attack for their ideas. But they continued thinking. They continued speaking. Their willingness to challenge their era's collective ignorance shaped our modern world. But understand, there's a cost. Thinking critically in societies punishing doubt constitutes rebellion. You risk being misunderstood, ostracized, even despised. But you also gain something invaluable. Clarity, self-respect, and the quiet strength from knowing your beliefs are authentically yours, not programmed. Let's make this personal. Why do so many feel lost, anxious, or unfulfilled despite accessing more information and technology than any previous generation? The answer lies not in what we possess, but what we've lost. Among our greatest losses, the habit of internal dialogue, the ability to sit with questions, explore them, and allow truth to emerge through reflection. We've outsourced our thinking to machines, media, and public opinion. But no algorithm can determine what's true for you. No trending topic can replace your inner voice. No mass movement can substitute for a well-examined belief's quiet certainty. What can we do? Begin by cultivating awareness. Awareness of mental habits, awareness of consumed sources, awareness of when we're thinking versus merely reacting. One powerful practice, metacognition, thinking about our thinking. Ask yourself, what's influencing my opinion currently? Am I open to being wrong? Am I engaging with this idea or passively absorbing it? Another practice, dialectical thinking, holding two opposing ideas in tension while exploring both. This transcends intellectual flexibility. It's mental strength. It allows you to move beyond binaries, beyond tribal thinking, into realms where genuine understanding emerges. Jiddu Krishnamurti said, "To understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet still." That stillness, so rare in our era, is where wisdom's seeds germinate. But let's be direct, analytical thinking isn't acquired overnight. It's a discipline. It requires reading, not just headlines, but books, complete arguments, nuanced thought. It requires listening, not just to allies, but especially to opponents. It requires humility, accepting uncertainty as part of the journey. And above all, it requires rejecting intellectual laziness. If something sounds too perfect, it probably is. If everyone around you believes something without questioning, that's your signal to pause. Not to automatically rebel, but to honestly investigate. In times when ignorance speaks loudly and confidence gets mistaken for competence, deep thinking isn't merely a personal virtue, it's a public service. Because any society's future depends not on opinion volume, but on thought quality. The most powerful transformation begins not with mass movements, but with one individual choosing to think clearly in a world that doesn't. In this final section, Sharon will reveal the most important truth, the core reason why analytical thinking is vanishing, and what you can do to not only resist this tide, but illuminate the path for others. What you're about to hear could transform how you perceive your mind, relationships, and role in shaping reality. The ultimate truth, fear of what thinking reveals. At this crisis's heart, beneath digital noise, failing institutions, and cultural polarization, lies something even more sinister. The real reason analytical thinking is disappearing isn't because people lack capacity, it's because they fear what it might reveal. To think critically means risking everything, providing psychological safety, our identity, beliefs, and tribal belonging. For many, these prove too precious to question. We inhabit an era where identity has become sacred. People define themselves through opinions, affiliations, and ideologies. Challenging an idea now gets perceived as personal attack. But this illusion destroys thought, the belief that we are our ideas. You aren't your political affiliation. You aren't your religion. You aren't your social group. You're a human being capable of evolution, learning, and transformation. That evolutionary journey begins when you detach your worth from current beliefs. The final and most important truth: analytical thinking isn't merely an intellectual skill, it's a spiritual practice. It's honoring truth over comfort, growth over certainty, and freedom over approval. It's the quiet decision to live with eyes open, even when light burns. Because once you start thinking critically, you begin perceiving surrounding structures, manipulation systems, control algorithms, and social masks people wear. It can feel overwhelming, even painful, but it's real. And reality, however uncomfortable, is the only foundation upon which genuine freedom can be built. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Yet facing our inner world, our unconscious motives, inherited beliefs, and cognitive traps is thinking's very essence. Analytical thinking isn't just about questioning the world. It's about questioning yourself. It's asking, why do I believe what I believe? Where did this idea originate? What parts of me fear releasing it? When you ask these questions honestly, a new world opens, not just of knowledge, but of wisdom. And wisdom is what our society desperately needs. In a culture addicted to instant answers, wisdom invites deeper questions. In a system built on noise, wisdom offers silence. In an era of mass conformity, wisdom dares to be free. This is your invitation, not just to think, but to awaken, to stop living as your environment's product and start becoming your mind's architect. Because no school, system, or social media platform will do this for you. The responsibility rests solely with you. And when you rise to it, something extraordinary occurs. You begin seeing with clarity. You begin experiencing what living in alignment with truth feels like. Not borrowed truth, not popular truth, but your own hard-earned truth. You begin noticing when manipulation targets you. You start distinguishing information from propaganda, education from indoctrination, connection from performance. And most importantly, you begin to lead, not with noise or ego, but with depth. You become a light in a dark room, a calm voice in an outraged storm, a grounded thinker in a reactionary world. This is what the world needs now more than ever. Not louder voices, not sharper arguments, but deeper minds. Minds willing to sit in complexity, minds willing to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Minds no longer seeking debate victories, but reality understanding. If you want to change the world, start by changing how you think. Not because it's easy, not because it's popular, but because it's right. The rise of collective intellectual decline isn't a cause, it's a symptom of fear, fatigue, and a world too distracted to look inward. But every act of clear thinking pushes back against that tide. Every moment you pause to reflect instead of react. Every time you ask questions instead of assuming answers. Every time you choose clarity over comfort, you reclaim your power. So as we conclude this journey, remember, the most revolutionary act in this moment isn't shouting, conforming, or repeating, it's thinking. Let others sleepwalk through slogans and screens. Let them trade freedom for validation. But not you. You're awake now, and once awakened, you cannot return. If this message resonated, share it, not because it's trendy, but because it's necessary. Leave a comment with your reflections, doubts, and insights. Because analytical thinking doesn't grow in silence, it grows in dialogue. And if you're still here, know this, you're not alone. A quiet revolution is happening, a movement not of noise, but of minds, not of outrage, but of awareness. And it begins every time one person chooses to ask harder questions. Let that person be you. Stay curious, stay awake, and above all, keep thinking. Thank you for watching.